October 1962, the White House. When a spy plane delivered photographs of what it had captured over Cuba, John F. Kennedy's face went pale. In that moment, nobody knew that the world was just 13 days away from nuclear war, and one wrong decision could mean the death of millions. The morning of October 16th, 1962. Sunlight streamed through the windows of the White House as the 45-year-old President Kennedy prepared for a routine meeting. Young, charismatic, and filled with ideals, this leader was burning with a dream to lead America into a new era. But the intelligence report that landed on his desk that morning would shatter all his dreams in an instant. The photographs taken by the U-2 spy plane over Cuba revealed a stark reality. The Soviet Union was building nuclear missile sites in Cuba, right on America's doorstep. Kennedy's hands trembled as he looked at the photos. These missiles could obliterate cities like Washington, New York, and Miami in just minutes. Nearly all of America was within range of these weapons. "How did they hide this?" Kennedy whispered. But the real question was, what would he do now? That day, Kennedy secretly assembled his most trusted advisors. His brother, Robert Kennedy, Defense Secretary Robert McNamara, and other top officials gathered in a secret room at the White House. This crisis committee, which they called Ex-Com, had convened to make perhaps the most critical decisions in human history. But Kennedy didn't yet know that the next 13 days would be not just a political test, but a test of humanity itself. This is where everything changed, because most of the military advisors in that room were proposing only one solution: immediately launch an airstrike on Cuba and destroy the missile sites. "Let's hit them now! We can't wait!" they were shouting. But Kennedy had something else on his mind. Kennedy slowly walked to the window. Outside, children were playing. People were heading to work. None of them knew that within days, the world could be plunged into nuclear war. A thought echoed in Kennedy's mind. If we launch an airstrike now, the Soviets will retaliate. This will start a world war, but if we wait and try the diplomatic route, maybe. Everyone in the room was waiting. The silence was heavy. Kennedy turned and gave a clear directive. "Naval blockade first. We'll stop all Soviet ships heading to Cuba. No ship carrying missiles will get through." This decision was bold but risky. The military advisors objected. "A blockade won't be enough, Mr. President." But Kennedy was determined. Diplomacy deserved a chance, because he didn't want to be just a war leader. He wanted to be an architect of peace. But here's what was truly shocking. At the very moment Kennedy made this decision, Soviet missiles in Cuba were already in launch-ready status. In just 10 minutes, America's capital could be destroyed. One of Kennedy's advisors whispered, "Mr. President, what if the Soviets respond to us stopping their ships?" Kennedy quietly replied, "I don't know. But we're about to find out," and they did find out, but in a way they never expected. Wait a minute, don't miss this detail. Because at the same time, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev was making different plans in Moscow. He knew very well that if this crisis was mismanaged, the world could end. But there was no bridge to connect the two leaders yet. And time was running out. The evening of October 22nd, 1962. Kennedy addressed the entire American nation on television. His voice was calm but resolute. "My fellow Americans, I must disclose to you a grave reality. Soviet missiles have been deployed in Cuba. These missiles have the nuclear strike capability against any nation in the Western Hemisphere. Therefore, I have initiated a naval blockade around Cuba. After that speech, the world held its breath. Everyone wondered, what would the Soviets do? The next day, Soviet ships continued advancing toward Cuba. The American Navy was ready. If a Soviet ship tried to break through the blockade, American vessels would stop it. And that could be the beginning of war. Kennedy was monitoring the situation at the White House. Every minute felt like a lifetime. Every time the phone rang, his heart jumped to his throat. The ships were approaching, 100 miles left, then 50, then 20. Right at that moment, news arrived. The Soviet ships had stopped. They were turning back. Kennedy took a deep breath. But it was too early to celebrate, because the missiles in Cuba were still there, and they needed to be removed. You haven't seen the biggest surprise yet, because at that time there was something being kept secret from the world. The Soviet commanders in Cuba had authorization to use nuclear weapons. If a conflict had broken out, they could have launched the missiles without waiting for orders from Moscow. And this was a reality that even Kennedy didn't know about. The night of October 24th, Kennedy sat alone in the Oval Office. A cold wind was blowing outside. The world was at the edge of a precipice, and he was caught between two choices. Either follow his general's advice and attack, or continue with diplomacy. That night, a letter arrived from Khrushchev. The letter was long, emotional, and clearly reflected fear. Khrushchev wrote, "Mr. President Kennedy, we two leaders are at the two ends of a rope, and this rope is getting knotted. If we cannot untie it, if we pull it tighter, at some point it will break. And then you know what will happen. War." When Kennedy read the letter, his eyes welled up. For the first time, he realized Khrushchev was scared too, just like him. He didn't want war either. He too wanted to return home to his family, to his people. Kennedy immediately wrote a response, but his answer came with a condition. Remove the missiles from Cuba. In return, America promises not to invade Cuba. After sending the letter, he began to wait. But the next day, a new letter arrived from Khrushchev. This time, the demand was different. Agreed, but America must also remove its missiles from Turkey. Kennedy was surprised. This demand made sense, but was politically risky. If he accepted, he would look weak. But if he refused, war was inevitable. You won't believe it, but at this point, Kennedy made a decision that saved the world. What you've seen so far is nothing, because at that moment, a Soviet submarine at sea had been cornered by American ships. The commander in that submarine was preparing to launch a nuclear torpedo, and with just the approval of 3 officers, he could fire a weapon that would end the world. October 27th, 1962, Saturday. Historians call this day Black Saturday, because on that day, the world experienced its closest moment to nuclear war. In the Atlantic Ocean, a Soviet submarine, B-59, was being tracked by American destroyers. American ships were dropping depth charges to force the submarine to surface. But the crew inside the submarine thought this was an attack. The submarine's commander, Valentin Savitsky, had gone ballistic. "War has started! Let's fire the nuclear torpedo," he shouted. 2 officers agreed, but there was a 3rd officer on that submarine, Vasily Arkhipov, and he used his veto power. "No," he said. "We won't fire until we get orders from Moscow." Arkhipov had made a decision that would go down in history. If he had allowed that torpedo to be launched at that moment, World War III would have begun. And today's world would be a very different place. Kennedy was unaware of this incident at the White House, but he was experiencing another crisis. An American U-2 spy plane had been shot down over Cuba. The pilot was killed. The military advisors were now getting impatient. "Mr. President, we must attack now." Kennedy brought his hands to his temples. His head was pounding. Everything was spiraling out of control. But he still believed in peace. And that belief saved the world. But what's truly shocking is the move Kennedy made that night. Because official channels had become clogged. Even sending letters back and forth was taking too much time. There was no time, and Kennedy activated a secret plan that nobody knew about. That night, Kennedy's brother, Robert Kennedy, secretly met with Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrinin. This meeting was never officially recorded. There were no cameras, just two men, a table, and the future of humanity. Robert Kennedy told the ambassador, "Listen, there's no time. My brother agrees to remove the missiles from Turkey. But this must remain secret. Officially, we'll only announce that the Cuban missiles have been removed. Deal?" Dobrinin blinked. This offer was unexpected. But it made sense. Both sides would win. Khrushchev could return to his country and say, "We won." Kennedy would have eliminated the threat in Cuba. The next morning, October 28, 1962, news came from Khrushchev. "Agreed. We're removing our missiles from Cuba." When Kennedy heard this news, a weight lifted from his heart. The world had pulled back from nuclear war. The 13-day nightmare was over. But the story doesn't end here. When they thought it was over, Kennedy did one more thing. Because he didn't just want to get through this crisis, he wanted to ensure that such a crisis would never happen again. And the step he took changed history. After the crisis ended, Kennedy sent a message to the world. His speech at American University in June 1963 was perhaps his most important speech. "Peace is possible," he said. "The Soviets are not our enemies. They're human just like us. They have children, they have dreams. And we all have common enemies: war, poverty, disease." After this speech, Kennedy signed a historic agreement with Khrushchev, the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. This treaty banned nuclear weapons testing in the atmosphere. It was perhaps a small step, but it was a giant leap toward peace. Kennedy also fought for civil rights. He passed laws so that Black Americans would have equal rights. He launched the space program and said, "Before this decade is out, we will send a man to the moon." And indeed, in 1969, Apollo 11 landed on the moon. But Kennedy didn't get to fully see these achievements. Because on November 22, 1963, he was assassinated in Dallas. He was only 46 years old. After Kennedy's death, the world mourned. But his legacy lived on. Because he wasn't just a president. He was a symbol of peace, courage, and human dignity. For 13 days, he made a choice. Not war, but diplomacy. Not violence, but dialogue. Not hatred, but understanding. And that choice saved millions of lives. Looking back today, we must understand this. History is written with courageous choices. Kennedy did just that. At a moment when he could have lost everything, he chose peace. And what would you have done? Everyone had learned the truth. The world had pulled back from nuclear war. But the real shock emerged years later. Kennedy, who never knew about Commander Arkapov's veto on that submarine, had actually returned from the brink of death without ever realizing it. History is sometimes written with one person's courage, sometimes with the rational decisions of two leaders, and sometimes with the moment a submarine commander says no. JFK's story teaches us this: peace requires courage, diplomacy requires strength, and being human requires, above all, empathy. This story is over, but its message still lives on. Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. John F. Kennedy.